The Zarketh Dominion had ruled the stars for so long that they believed nothing could ever threaten them. Their empire stretched across hundreds of worlds, filled with advanced cities and powerful armies. Every species they met in the galaxy had bowed before their strength. Some tried to fight, but their resistance always ended in ashes. The Zarketh believed fear was only for the weak. They trained their soldiers to be emotionless, efficient, and loyal. To them, fear was a disease that humans might feel, but not them. They had forgotten what it meant to be afraid. They were not born evil, but they had grown cruel through power. Generations of victories had turned them arrogant. Their fleets could destroy a planet from orbit within hours. Their technology could bend gravity, and their weapons could melt steel like wax. They ruled through dominance, not mercy. Entire civilizations had been wiped out just to make others obey. The Zarketh believed they were the chosen rulers of the universe, and no one had ever proved them wrong. The Dominion soldiers were tall, armored beings with skin like dark metal. Their eyes glowed faintly in the dark. Their voices carried a cold echo. They didn't understand laughter or kindness. Their lives were built only around command and obedience. Their leaders, the high generals, sat in crystal towers orbiting distant suns, watching fleets conquer planets like pieces on a board. Every new conquest was another victory to mark in their endless history of control. But one day their long-range scanners detected something strange. On the far edge of a spiral arm near a quiet system of 9 planets, they found a world full of life. It was blue and green, covered in oceans and forests, with a breathable atmosphere and countless cities. The planet's inhabitants called it Earth. To the Zarketh, it was just another primitive world, catalogued as Terra 3 in their records. They saw the humans' old-fashioned weapons, their nuclear bombs, and thought it was laughable. The Zarketh sent their reconnaissance ships first, silent and unseen, to study the planet. They watched humans on their screens, walking, building, fighting, celebrating, crying. To the Zarketh, humans seemed fragile, emotional, and disorganized. They saw humans working in factories, exploring space in small ships, and arguing over resources. Primitive, one Zarketh observer said with a sneer. They still burn chemicals for energy. They are no threat. Reports were sent to the Dominion capital, and soon the decision was made. Earth would be conquered and harvested. Its people would be enslaved or erased. The high generals didn't even think of it as a war. To them it was routine, a cleaning operation. Another easy victory for the empire that had never lost. A massive fleet was prepared. Dozens of warships, each the size of a mountain, began their journey toward the Sol system. Inside their ships, soldiers prepared for what they called the cleansing. They joked about how quickly this new world would fall. None of them had ever heard of humans before, and none of them cared to. The Zarketh didn't study their enemies. They simply destroyed them. When the Zarketh fleet arrived near the moon, their scanners began to map Earth's surface. They saw the oceans sparkle under sunlight, the cities glowing at night, and the strange movements of thousands of satellites. The humans were sending radio signals, music, and conversations out into space, completely unaware that a war fleet was watching them. To the Zarketh, it looked like a world full of noise and chaos. They found it amusing. The invasion order came without warning. In one motion, the Zarketh unleashed their power. Their ships darkened the sky over major cities. The first strikes hit Earth's orbit, disabling communication networks. Power grids failed. Satellites burned in the atmosphere. Within hours, the world was filled with confusion and fear. The Zarketh expected panic and surrender. That was how every other civilization had fallen. Quickly, silently, hopelessly. But what the Zarketh didn't expect was resistance. Humans didn't surrender. Instead, they started fighting. They had no idea who their attackers were or what they wanted, but something deep inside them refused to bow. Military forces scrambled jets into the sky. Ground soldiers defended cities, and even civilians began to help in any way they could. Humanity's nature had always been to survive against impossible odds, and this was no different. The Zarketh watched the human defense with curiosity at first. Their plasma weapons could burn tanks. Their energy shields could stop any missile, and their drones could cut through entire battalions. But even after devastating losses, the humans kept coming. They didn't run. They didn't hide. They adapted. They built new weapons, coordinated attacks, and used guerrilla tactics. In one small battle near Mars, a handful of human pilots held off an entire Zarketh squadron for 3 days. Their ships were slower, weaker and outdated, but they refused to give up. They used the wreckage of destroyed ships as cover, turning debris into traps. When they ran out of ammunition, they rammed enemy vessels. To the Zarketh, it was madness. To the humans, it was survival. Back on Earth, the first Zarketh ground forces landed near major cities. They expected the humans to surrender once they saw their towering war machines. But instead they were met with fire. Human soldiers, police, and even civilians fought back with whatever they had. Guns, explosives, even vehicles turned into weapons. Entire neighborhoods became battlegrounds. The Zarketh had never seen such disorganized fury. It wasn't logical warfare. It was raw human determination. Zarketh commanders couldn't understand it. Every other world had begged for mercy after seeing the first glimpse of Zarketh firepower. Yet these small, fragile creatures were screaming in defiance even when their weapons were useless. Some Zarketh officers began to feel uneasy. There was something strange about the way humans fought, not for power or survival alone, but for each other. In one transmission captured by a Zarketh observer, a human soldier's voice was heard saying, "We don't care who they are. We hold the line. This is our home." The words echoed across the command ship. The Zarketh had never heard anything like it. They couldn't comprehend loyalty that came from emotion, from love of one's planet and people. Their kind obeyed because they were programmed to. Humans obeyed because they chose to. As days passed, the Zarketh continued their invasion, destroying cities and claiming territories. Yet every time they thought they had won, humans found a way to strike back. The Zarketh began to see that these creatures were not like others. They didn't fear pain. They didn't give up after loss. They adapted faster than any species the Dominion had ever faced. When a Zarketh fleet commander sent his final report to the high generals, he wrote a short message before his ship went dark. "This species, they are different. They are unpredictable. They should not exist." The Zarketh still believed victory was inevitable, but a small shadow of doubt began to creep through their ranks. For the first time in generations, some among them felt something they couldn't describe. It wasn't confusion. It wasn't anger. It was the faint beginning of fear, something they had believed their kind had long forgotten. And so, the legend of the humans began to spread through the Dominion's communication channels. The Empire that had never known defeat was about to learn that there were forces in the universe that could not be crushed by strength alone. The Zarketh had met countless civilizations, but none had ever looked at them with defiance in their eyes. None had ever refused to kneel. Until now, the blue planet that they had dismissed as primitive was becoming their nightmare. The world called Earth, full of fragile creatures called humans, was about to remind the galaxy that survival is not always about power. Sometimes it's about heart. And soon the Zarketh would learn that nothing in the universe scared them, until they met humans. The first time the Zarketh met humans face to face, they didn't think much of it. To them, it was just another step in a simple invasion. Their warships hovered over cities. Their soldiers landed on strange green terrain, and their machines marched across roads that cracked beneath their weight. The Zarketh were calm, mechanical, and emotionless. But on the other side, humans were already preparing for something they had never imagined before: a war against creatures from the stars. At first, Earth's governments were in chaos. Communication networks had been damaged in the first wave of attacks, and leaders struggled to understand what was happening. No one could explain who the attackers were or what they wanted. Some thought it was a mistake, some thought it was a test from another country. But soon, when the first alien warships were captured on live broadcast, the truth became clear. The world was under invasion. In every corner of the Earth, people stopped whatever they were doing and looked to the skies. Cities glowed under alien shadows. In New York and Tokyo and Moscow and Karachi and London, the same cold, dark ships hung above like silent predators. There was no sound, no warning. Then a deep hum filled the air and energy blasts cut through the sky. Buildings fell. Streets shattered. Humanity's age of peace was over. But humans are strange creatures. Where fear should have ruled, courage appeared. The armies of the world, normally divided by politics, came together almost overnight. Military bases around the globe shared intelligence. Scientists began decoding. Alien signals, and pilots took to the air even though they knew their aircraft stood no chance against the alien fighters. There was no plan, only the instinct to fight back. The Zarketh didn't understand this reaction. On hundreds of other worlds, the first sight of their fleet had always caused panic. Civilizations surrendered before the first shot was fired. But the humans, they were not running. They were fighting back with everything they had. Even though their technology was weak, their strategy seemed fueled by something no alien could explain: rage, hope, and pure defiance. On the first day of ground combat, the Zarketh landed near a human settlement to test their strength. They expected an easy victory. Their drones moved forward with laser precision while armored vehicles followed. But before they could even fire, explosions erupted around them. Humans had planted traps everywhere, under bridges, in tunnels, in the very roads they walked on. The Zarketh were confused. No civilization had ever thought to strike first. One Zarketh commander named Varkoth reported, "These creatures fight without fear. Even when they know they are defeated, they attack. Their logic is broken." His soldiers nodded, but didn't understand. To the Zarketh, battle was mathematics, strategy, timing, and control. But the humans didn't follow any of that. They fought with chaos, with unpredictability. They didn't fear death. They seemed almost to welcome it if it meant saving others. In one famous event, later called the Battle of Red Valley, a small group of human soldiers held off a much larger Zarketh force for 3 entire days. They were outnumbered 20 to 1, their weapons overheated, and their communications were cut off. But they didn't stop. They used the environment, rocks, fire, and even wrecked vehicles to create barriers. When ammunition ran out, they fought with knives, with tools, even with their bare hands. The Zarketh eventually won the valley, but they didn't celebrate. For the first time, they had suffered fear, not physical pain, but something deeper. After that, Zarketh commanders began to study humans more closely. They started intercepting human broadcasts, watching news reports and battle footage. They saw how humans spoke to each other, how they comforted the wounded, how they cried for their dead. The Zarketh didn't understand tears. To them, showing emotion was weakness. But something about humans unsettled them. They had emotions but still fought harder than any machine. Meanwhile, in orbit, the human resistance had begun to form alliances. Space agencies that once competed now worked together. Scientists combined resources to build new weapons, reverse engineering small pieces of alien technology captured from crashed ships. It was slow, dangerous work, but it gave people hope. Humans were learning quickly. They were adapting as they always had throughout their history. One Zarketh scientist studying humans reported to his general, "Their strength does not come from technology. It comes from something invisible. When one of them falls, another takes their place. When a city burns, survivors build walls with the ruins. They are like fire. The more you try to crush them, the more they spread." The general dismissed the report, calling it nonsense. But deep down, even he couldn't ignore the pattern. The Zarketh were beginning to lose small battles, not because of lack of power, but because of confusion. They didn't understand human unpredictability. Humans would suddenly change tactics mid-battle. They would sacrifice themselves to protect others. They would charge into hopeless fights simply to buy time for civilians to escape. These actions made no sense to the Zarketh, who had been trained to value efficiency above all else. There was another thing that unsettled them. Humans laughed. Even during chaos and destruction, soldiers shared jokes on their radios, comforting each other. One alien commander intercepted a human signal where soldiers were laughing moments before they died. "We'll see them in hell," one voice said. "Save me a seat." The Zarketh officers were silent, listening to it. They didn't understand how someone could laugh at death. It was unnatural to them. In one tragic yet powerful moment, a human spaceship near Mars faced a full Zarketh attack. The humans knew they couldn't win, but instead of fleeing, they stayed to protect a transport ship carrying civilians. The pilot, Commander Elena Ruiz, sent her last message before impact. "Tell Earth we're still fighting." Her ship rammed a Zarketh cruiser, destroying both. The image of her final act spread through human and alien communications alike. For humans, it was a symbol of courage. For the Zarketh, it was something else, a warning. As days turned into weeks, the Zarketh began to sense something new inside their ranks. Their soldiers, once calm and confident, began to hesitate. Some reported strange dreams. Others said they felt unease before battles. A few even disobeyed orders out of caution. Fear, something that had been erased from their species long ago, was quietly returning. The humans didn't know this. They were too busy fighting, surviving, and mourning their dead. But the effect was spreading. For the first time in Zarketh history, their perfect war machine was showing cracks. Soldiers who once called humans primitive now whispered their name like a curse. Humans, they said, are not logical. They do not die when they should. They keep fighting when they are broken. In the ruins of a destroyed city, a captured Zarketh officer was questioned by human soldiers. He spoke calmly at first, describing his orders and mission. But when asked why his people invaded, he said, "Because we thought you were weak. We thought fear ruled you." The human commander looked at him and replied, "You're wrong. Fear doesn't rule us. It drives us." That answer spread like wildfire. Humans began repeating it as a motto. Fear doesn't rule us. It drives us. It became the symbol of their resistance, the words painted on walls, ships, and uniforms. The Zarketh intercepted the message and couldn't understand how something so simple could inspire millions. But they saw the results. Every human seemed more determined than before. As the invasion continued, humans began to fight not just for their planet, but for the idea that no one, not even an empire from the stars, could take away their right to exist. For every city the Zarketh destroyed, humans rebuilt another. For every soldier lost, another volunteered. And in the quiet moments between battles, when the sky burned red and smoke covered the horizon, humans looked at the stars not with fear, but with defiance. The Zarketh had come expecting an easy victory. They had expected surrender, silence, and submission. Instead, they found chaos, courage, and a kind of strength they had never seen before. For the first time in their long history, the Zarketh Dominion realized that this war would not end quickly. The humans were not prey. They were predators hiding in plain sight, ready to fight to their last breath. And somewhere deep inside their cold metal hearts, the Zarketh began to understand a terrifying truth. They were facing a species that could not be broken. The humans were not fighting to win a war. They were fighting to survive. And survival, as the Zarketh would soon learn, was humanity's greatest weapon. The war between the Zarketh Dominion and humanity had dragged on longer than anyone expected. What was supposed to be a quick and easy conquest had turned into a nightmare that the Zarketh could not escape. The more they fought the humans, the less they understood them. Every report, every encounter, every battle ended with the same strange conclusion. Humans were not logical and they were not afraid. They kept fighting, even when the battle was already lost. And that scared the Zarketh more than any weapon ever could. In the cold, dark halls of the Zarketh command ship, whispers began to spread. Soldiers who had faced humans firsthand spoke, quietly among themselves, something unheard of in their rigid culture. They told stories about humans who fought until their last breath, who smiled even while bleeding, who looked their enemies in the eye without fear. One soldier said he had seen a human, badly wounded, throw a grenade at his own position to take out a dozen Zarketh soldiers. Another claimed he had seen human medics refuse to retreat, choosing instead to stay behind and save the injured. To the Zarketh, such acts were madness, but to humans, it was normal. The Dominion's generals tried to silence these stories, calling them war myths. But the fear had already started to grow. The Zarketh had never known fear before. Their entire species had been trained to erase it. But something about humanity's defiance had brought that lost emotion back. Some soldiers began having nightmares. Others refused to go to the front lines. A few even destroyed their own weapons in panic. Meanwhile, on Earth, the humans were learning too. They were studying the Zarketh, finding weaknesses, and adapting. Every time they lost a battle, they learned from it. Scientists studied captured alien technology, reverse engineering it to create shields, plasma weapons, and drones. What had started as chaos was slowly turning into organized resistance. The world's armies were united under one flag, the Earth Defense Force, and their motto was simple: "We do not kneel." Still, the cost was high. Cities were in ruins. Millions had died. The sky over Earth was darkened by the smoke of burning ships. Yet even in the ruins, humans kept living, rebuilding, and preparing for the next fight. Children were born in underground shelters. Farmers planted crops in radioactive soil. Soldiers slept beside the ruins of their homes, ready to rise again at the first sign of attack. Humanity's spirit was like fire. It burned brightest when surrounded by darkness. For the Zarketh, this was unbearable. They had been raised to believe they were the strongest species in the universe. But now they were facing a race that broke all logic. Their generals ordered more fleets, more weapons, more destruction. "Crush them completely," the High Command ordered. "Burn their world until nothing is left." The Zarketh fleets attacked again, this time with overwhelming force. They bombarded Earth's surface, destroying everything in their path. Oceans boiled, mountains cracked, and entire continents burned. But even then, the humans didn't stop fighting. They built bunkers beneath the ground, submarines beneath the oceans, and orbital cannons hidden inside asteroids. When the Zarketh thought they had wiped out human resistance, they would be ambushed again by survivors they had missed. There was one moment that changed everything: the siege of Titan Base. It was a secret human colony hidden on Saturn's largest moon. Built in silence after the war began, the Zarketh discovered it by accident and sent a full fleet to destroy it. The humans there had no hope of victory. They were outnumbered and outgunned. But instead of surrendering, they fought harder than anyone had before. For 7 days they held the line. When their weapons failed, they used mining lasers. When power ran out, they fought in the dark. And when all seemed lost, they detonated the entire base, destroying half the attacking fleet. Not one human survived, but neither did their enemies. After that battle, Zarketh soldiers began calling humans the Burning Ones. The name spread through their ranks like wildfire. It wasn't meant as an insult, it was a word of fear, because no matter how many humans they killed, more would rise. They were like fire, impossible to contain, impossible to control. Zarketh commanders began to study human biology to understand them better. They dissected bodies, scanned brains, and analyzed heart rates during combat. What they found disturbed them. When humans were afraid, their bodies released chemicals that made them stronger, faster, and more focused. What should have been a weakness became a weapon. Fear made humans more dangerous. The scientists reported back to their generals. Humans use fear as fuel. They fight harder the closer they are to death. That single sentence spread through the Dominion like a curse. The word fear had returned to their vocabulary, and it carried the face of a human. Back on Earth, the war had turned into something deeper than survival. It had become a battle for identity. People no longer saw themselves as citizens of nations. They were simply human. Artists painted murals on destroyed walls, faces of fallen soldiers, words of hope, pictures of children holding the earth in their hands. The resistance broadcasts carried one message again and again: we will not stop. Even in their darkest moments, humanity found a way to inspire each other. In one powerful broadcast, a human commander named Captain Rhodes spoke to all of Earth. His voice echoed through surviving communication channels. They think we are weak because we cry. They think we are broken because we bleed. But they don't understand. Our tears are not weakness, they are proof that we still feel. And our blood. It means we are still alive. As long as one of us breathes, Earth stands. Those words reached even the Zarketh commanders, and though they would never admit it, they felt something strange stir inside them. The Zarketh began to lose morale. They started questioning their leaders. Some refused to invade again. Others destroyed their communication chips and fled. It was a slow infection of the mind, an emotion they didn't understand eating away at their confidence. They had always believed themselves gods among species, but humans had made them feel something no god should ever feel: doubt. To try to restore control, the Zarketh High Command sent one of their most feared generals, Zavkor, to Earth. He was known for never showing emotion. for wiping out 10 planets without mercy. His arrival was meant to end the war once and for all. He ordered the complete extermination of humanity. But when he finally faced human resistance on the battlefield, something changed. Shavkor watched as human soldiers fought with everything they had. He saw a young soldier, barely more than a boy, stand in front of a burning tank and fire his weapon until his hands bled. He saw medics running into explosions to save the wounded. He saw pilots crashing their ships into his dreadnought to stop him from reaching Earth. None of it made sense. He couldn't understand why they kept going. Finally, he asked a captured soldier, "Why do you fight when you know you will die?" The human looked up at him, his face bruised and bleeding, and simply said, "Because it matters." Those 3 words hit harder than any weapon. For the first time in his long life, Shavkor hesitated. He began to question everything he had been taught. Could a species built on emotion and chaos truly be stronger than one built on control and order? Could fear really be a weapon, not a weakness? The war continued, but the balance had shifted. The Zarketh were no longer invincible. They were uncertain. Their soldiers fought, but their hearts were no longer in it. The humans, on the other hand, had never been stronger. Their spirit burned brighter than ever. Every loss made them fiercer. Every death gave birth to 10 new fighters. Across the galaxy, other civilizations began to hear whispers about the humans. Species once afraid of the Zarketh started to hope. They sent secret messages to Earth, offering help, weapons, and alliances. Humanity had become more than just a planet fighting for survival. They had become a symbol of resistance against tyranny. The Zarketh Dominion had set out to destroy humanity, but instead, they had awakened something greater than they ever imagined. The emotion they once mocked had turned into the one thing they could not defeat. For the first time, the mighty empire looked at itself and saw cracks forming in its armor. And somewhere deep in space, the Zarketh High Command realized the terrible truth. They were no longer fighting just a species. They were fighting a force born from courage, fear, love, and pain. They were fighting humanity itself. And there was no weapon in the universe powerful enough to destroy that. The battle that would come to define the war between the Zarketh Dominion and humanity began on a quiet, cold morning near Kepler Gate, a strategic outpost at the edge of human-controlled space. The Zarketh had brought everything they had: 5 massive dreadnoughts, 20 cruisers, and hundreds of fighter drones. Their plan was simple: annihilate the human defense line and crush any hope of resistance. The Dominion's generals expected a quick victory. They believed humanity was tough, but not enough to stop the overwhelming force of their empire. They were wrong. On the human side, the defenders were vastly outnumbered. Their fleet consisted of battered frigates, scavenged satellites armed with missiles, and a small number of pilots who had seen more than their fair share of death. Many of the soldiers had never flown in real space combat before. They were exhausted, hungry, and bruised from months of endless war. Yet despite the odds, their morale was unshakable. They knew what they were defending: their homes, their families, and their very existence. There was no plan for surrender because surrender was not an option. As the Zarketh fleet arrived, their ships darkened the space like a living shadow. Their energy weapons began to charge, and the first volley of plasma beams struck human ships before they could react. Many vessels exploded instantly. Their crews vaporized in the searing heat. Human pilots saw their comrades vanish before their eyes, but they refused to retreat. Instead, they flew straight into the fire, using the chaos to their advantage. The Zarketh had expected panic. They had expected humans to scatter. What they did not expect was precision and desperation. The human fleet began using tactics the Zarketh could not predict. They used small debris fields and asteroid belts to hide their ships, launching surprise attacks on the enemy's flanks. When missiles were fired at them, they used clever maneuvers, spinning, diving, and weaving through space at impossible speeds. Even when their weapons failed, they improvised. One pilot rammed his damaged ship into a Zarketh cruiser, sending it spinning out of formation. Another launched an emergency energy burst that disabled a drone swarm, sacrificing his own vessel in the process. To the Zarketh, these acts were insanity, but to the humans, they were survival. On the ground, the situation was equally fierce. Human soldiers on Kepler Gate had built barricades, underground bunkers, and trap lines to delay the Zarketh advance. When alien troops attempted to breach their positions, they found themselves caught in ambushes from all sides. Mines exploded, flamethrowers erupted, and snipers fired from hidden locations. Every inch of territory had been turned into a battlefield. The Zarketh were forced to retreat repeatedly, sustaining losses that their records had never accounted for. During the fighting, human medics became legends. They risked their lives to drag the wounded from the front lines, treating burns, fractures, and radiation injuries under enemy fire. Civilians helped as well, transporting supplies, repairing damaged defenses, and even taking up arms. It was not just a fight for victory. It was a fight for survival, for every life that could be saved. The human spirit turned the battlefield into something the Zarketh had never witnessed, an organized chaos, a storm that refused to end. In one notable moment, Commander Elena Ruiz, who had become a symbol of human resistance after her heroic actions on Mars, led a daring counterattack. Her ship, barely operational and riddled with damage, darted through the Zarketh formation, targeting weak points in their fleet. She destroyed a critical control tower on one of the dreadnoughts, causing confusion among the enemy ranks. When asked later why she risked everything, she said simply, "Because if we don't fight, we die, and I refuse to die quietly." Her actions inspired others to follow, sparking a wave of courage across the human lines. The Zarketh were stunned. Their formations, once perfect, began to crumble. Dreadnoughts that had never faltered were now damaged or destroyed. Fighter squadrons went missing, swallowed by unexpected ambushes. Their calculations, which had predicted certain victory, were thrown into chaos. They had underestimated humans, not just as soldiers, but as a force that could think, adapt, and resist beyond reason. Even when it seemed like all hope was lost, the humans refused to yield. When ammunition ran out, they fought with whatever was at hand: tools, machinery, and even their bare hands in close quarters combat aboard crippled ships. Pilots ejected into space to manually sabotage enemy drones. Engineers rigged old satellites to explode at the perfect moment, taking out entire Zarketh squads. Every act of defiance fueled the others. Every life lost became a motivation for the living. The turning point came when human orbital cannons, hidden inside captured asteroids, activated simultaneously. The Zarketh fleet had not detected them, and the sudden barrage tore through their formations. Cruisers collided, ships were destroyed mid-flight, and panic spread through the enemy ranks. For the first time, the Zarketh realized that no matter how powerful their weapons were, humans always had another move, always another plan. On the battlefield, human soldiers shouted to one another over open channels, "Hold the line! For Earth! For each other!" Their voices carried not just orders, but determination and unity. Even those who were wounded or exhausted responded. They moved together, a single living force against an enemy that had thought them insignificant. It was a type of coordination the Zarketh could not comprehend. Machines, yes, but human determination was different. It was unpredictable, fierce and relentless. When the dust settled, the human forces had held Kepler Gate. Though they had suffered heavy casualties, the Zarketh fleet had been crippled, with many ships destroyed or retreating in confusion. The victory was not complete, and the war was far from over. But the humans had proven something monumental, even against impossible odds. They could endure and strike back. The Zarketh soldiers returned to their command ships in shock. They had always believed themselves unshakable, their power absolute. But humans had shown them a new kind of threat, not through strength alone, but through sheer will, courage, and unpredictability. For the first time, soldiers who had never known fear now questioned their own invincibility. They whispered stories about human warriors who refused to die, about medics who risked everything to save strangers, and about pilots who charged alone into death just to protect their fleet. High Command convened immediately. The generals who had once dismissed humanity as weak now debated strategy like never before. They had underestimated the humans' resilience, adaptability, and spirit. Reports flooded in describing acts of bravery that no Zarketh logic could explain. One general admitted quietly, "This species, they are something we cannot control. They do not fight like others. They fight for something more." The humans themselves celebrated quietly, though there was no time for rest. Every victory was a reminder that they were still alive, that they could still fight another day. Across the globe and in the surrounding space, they repaired damaged ships, treated the wounded, and rebuilt defenses. Every citizen contributed in some way, whether in the battlefield, the laboratories, or the factories producing weapons and supplies. Their determination was infectious, a wave that carried them forward even when hope seemed scarce. The Battle of Kepler Gate became a legend not only among humans, but even among the Zarketh. Soldiers who survived the fight carried the memory like a scar, a reminder that no victory against humans would ever be easy. For the Zarketh, it was the first real defeat in centuries, a wound to their pride that could never be fully healed. They realized that the humans were not just surviving, they were shaping the course of the war. In the aftermath, both sides took stock. Humans had proven that courage could defy logic, that spirit could overcome technology, and that unity could stand against any empire. The Zarketh had learned the harshest lesson of their existence. Fear was not a weakness for humans, it was their weapon. Every act of defiance, every sacrifice, every explosion of courage made them stronger. From that day forward, the galaxy would remember the Battle of Kepler Gate. It was not a battle won by the strongest or the fastest. It was a battle won by the spirit of a species that refused to bend, a species that refused to die quietly, a species that even the mighty Zarketh could not break.
Humanity had proven its worth not just as survivors,
but as warriors the universe would never forget. And the Zarketh, who had never known fear, began to understand that nothing in the universe could prepare them for what humans were capable of. They had met the one force that could shake even the most unshakable empire, and for the first time they felt the tremor of fear. It was subtle, quiet, but undeniable. The humans had won more than a battle. They had shown the galaxy that courage, hope, and defiance could become a power stronger than any weapon. The war between humanity and the Zarketh Dominion had reached a point where nothing would ever be the same. The humans had survived what the Zarketh believed was impossible. Entire fleets had been destroyed, massive cities had fallen, and yet humanity had endured. Across Earth and in the orbiting stations, people celebrated not because the war was over, but because they had proven something essential. They were unbreakable. Every survivor, every soldier, every civilian had contributed to this truth. They had faced the strongest empire in the galaxy, and had not only lived but had struck back. The aftermath of the Battle of Kepler Gate marked a turning point in the war. For the Zarketh, it was a humbling, almost humiliating moment. Their fleets had been shattered, their soldiers had seen acts of courage they could not understand, and their generals were forced to reconsider their strategies. What had been a straightforward plan to conquer the humans had turned into a nightmare of chaos and confusion. Fear, a sensation that the Zarketh thought had long been eliminated from their species, began to take root. Soldiers whispered stories about humans fighting without weapons, sacrificing themselves to save others, and facing death with a smile. It was a fear born not of power but of spirit, something the Zarketh could not fight with technology or orders. On Earth, life slowly began to recover, though the scars of war were everywhere. Cities were destroyed, infrastructure lay in ruins, and millions of people had been lost. But humanity had never been defined solely by what they could build. They were defined by what they could endure. Across the continents, survivors worked together to rebuild what they could. Engineers repaired damaged power grids, farmers planted crops in the burned soil, and communities supported each other in ways that no army could teach. Every act of reconstruction was an act of defiance, a message to the Zarketh that humanity would not yield. In space, the human fleet had grown stronger. Scientists had learned from every battle, engineers had adapted alien technology, and pilots had gained experience that made them as deadly as they were fearless. The humans no longer fought simply to survive, they fought with confidence and strategy. They had learned to anticipate Zarketh tactics, to exploit weaknesses, and to act as a single, coordinated force. Even in the darkest corners of the galaxy, human resistance groups communicated and collaborated, turning isolated outposts into formidable defensive positions. Humanity was no longer reactive. They had become proactive, shaping the war instead of simply enduring it. The Zarketh, despite their advanced technology, could not understand this. They had never encountered a species that thrived under pressure, that turned fear into strength, and that could adapt so quickly. Reports of human heroism spread throughout the Dominion's ranks, creating doubt and uncertainty among soldiers who had been trained to believe in absolute control. In some cases, Zarketh units refused orders, retreating when they should have advanced. Generals argued over strategy, realizing that the humans were not just a military threat. They were a force of nature, unpredictable and unstoppable in ways they had never seen before. One story that spread widely during this period was that of Captain Elena Ruiz, who had survived countless battles despite injuries that would have killed most. She led a team to sabotage a Zarketh dreadnought, boarding the ship despite knowing it was a near-suicide mission. Using clever tactics, they disabled the vessel's main weapons, giving the human fleet a chance to strike. Elena and her team were eventually captured, but their actions had saved thousands of lives and crippled one of the Dominion's most powerful assets. Her courage became legendary, symbolizing the unyielding human spirit. Across Earth, ordinary people became extraordinary. Civilians joined the military, repaired spacecraft, or defended their homes. Children learned survival skills and helped with logistics. Communities shared resources, guided newcomers, and cared for the wounded. Humanity had transformed itself into a living fortress, not just relying on weapons and machines, but on the determination of every individual. Even those who were too young or too old to fight contributed in meaningful ways, proving that every human mattered in the struggle. The psychological impact on the Zarketh was profound. The Dominion, which had always relied on fear and intimidation to control the galaxy, found that humans would not be intimidated. Entire fleets that should have crushed the human resistance were destroyed or scattered. Soldiers who had never felt doubt began to question the morality and logic of their orders. Generals debated whether continuing the war was worth the losses, but pride and stubbornness kept them fighting. Yet deep down, every encounter reminded them that humanity was not a species they could control. One particularly defining moment came during the Battle of Luna Station. Human forces, vastly outnumbered, used guerrilla tactics and clever engineering to destroy the Zarketh's orbital command center. Ships crashed, drones exploded, and the Zarketh were forced to retreat for the first time in recorded history. This victory was more than strategic, it was symbolic. The humans had struck the heart of the Dominion's power without fear, and in doing so, they proved that no empire, no matter how advanced, could dominate a species willing to fight for its existence. The news of human victories spread throughout the galaxy. Other civilizations, once fearful of the Zarketh, began to see humanity in a new light. Some offered covert support, sending supplies, weapons, or intelligence. Others sent emissaries to learn from humans, inspired by the courage and determination that had turned the tide of the war. Humanity had become a symbol of resistance, a shining example of what a united, determined species could achieve. As the years passed, the Zarketh gradually retreated from human-controlled space. They had suffered more losses than they could replace, and the uncertainty of human resilience made further attacks too costly. For the first time in their history, the Dominion had been forced to admit that victory was not guaranteed, that fear could indeed exist even in the hearts of their soldiers, and that humans were not a species that could be conquered through sheer power. Humans, however, did not celebrate with arrogance. They mourned their losses, rebuilt what they could, and prepared for the future. The war had taught them valuable lessons about strategy, resilience, and the importance of unity. It had also shown them something more profound, the strength of the human spirit. Even when faced with annihilation, humans had stood together, fought tirelessly, and refused to bow. This became a lesson not just for themselves but for the rest of the galaxy. Humanity was not to be underestimated. Stories of heroism became legend. Soldiers who had sacrificed themselves to save others were remembered in memorials, in broadcasts, and in the hearts of those who survived. Communities that had been destroyed were rebuilt stronger, with new generations raised to remember the courage and determination that had saved their species. Humanity had emerged from the war not merely as survivors, but as a force that demanded recognition, respect, and fear from every civilization in the galaxy. The Zarketh, humbled and fearful, began to tell stories of humanity to their own children and soldiers. They spoke of pilots who charged into impossible battles, medics who risked death to save strangers, and civilians who became warriors. The word human became a synonym for unpredictability, courage, and danger. Even the most powerful among them acknowledged that there was a force in the universe they could not dominate. For humanity, the lessons of the war extended beyond survival. They learned to value courage, to rely on unity, and to recognize the power of hope. They understood that technology alone could not guarantee victory, that every individual mattered, and that the human spirit was a weapon far more powerful than any ship or weapon system. The war had reshaped the planet, the species, and the way the universe perceived them. Generations later, the tales of the war were passed down. Children grew up hearing about the battles, the sacrifices, and the heroes who refused to die quietly. Humanity became a legend in its own time, not because of conquest or domination, but because of resilience, defiance, and unbreakable will. The Zarketh, once the most feared species in the galaxy, had learned to fear something new, not weapons, fleets, or planets, but humans themselves. In the end, the greatest victory was not the destruction of enemy ships or even the survival of a planet. The true triumph was the proof that a species could stand together against impossible odds, refuse to be broken, and inspire the galaxy with the strength of their spirit. Humans had faced annihilation and had not only survived, they had become a symbol of courage and hope for all intelligent life. And so, across the stars, the story spread. Nothing in the universe had ever scared the Zarketh. Nothing had ever challenged their dominance until they met humans. The humans' courage, resilience, and refusal to yield had rewritten the rules of the galaxy. They had proven that fear could be transformed into strength, that unity could defeat overwhelming power, and that the heart of a determined species was mightier than any empire. The galaxy remembered, the Zarketh feared, and humanity endured, not as conquerors but as a force of life, spirit, and hope that could never be destroyed. Even in the darkest reaches of space, the legacy of the humans shone brightly, a reminder that survival, courage, and defiance were the most powerful forces in existence.